There is a number hidden in the desert that should not exist. On the Giza plateau, 30 miles south of Cairo, the Great Pyramid stands at coordinates 29.97, 9245, 8 degrees north latitude. For thousands of years, travelers, scholars, and conquerors have passed this monument without recognizing what that number means. But in 1983, something changed. That was the year humanity finally measured the exact speed of light in a vacuum: 299,792,458 meters per second. The coordinates of the pyramid match the speed of light down to the 8th decimal place. Not approximately, not close enough to be interesting. Precisely, the kind of precision that makes engineers go silent, that makes physicists uncomfortable, that makes historians look away because acknowledging it means admitting something impossible. Someone encoded a universal constant into the location of a monument, supposedly built by Bronze Age workers using copper tools and rope, a constant we only discovered after developing atomic clocks and laser interferometry, a number that defines the maximum speed at which information can travel through the universe, carved into the Earth as a coordinate, before anyone knew coordinates existed, before anyone understood what light speed meant, before anyone should have possessed that knowledge. This is not the beginning of the mystery. This is where the cover-up starts to crack. Walk inside the Great Pyramid, and you will find 8 granite beams forming the ceiling of the king's chamber. Each beam weighs approximately 70 tons. They were quarried in Aswan, 500 miles to the south, transported somehow across the Nile, then raised 350 feet into the air, and fitted together with a precision that would challenge modern construction crews equipped with laser levels and computer-guided machinery. The tolerances are what break the official story. These granite blocks are cut and placed with an accuracy of 0.0002 inches, 2/10,000ths of an inch. To put that in perspective, a human hair is approximately 3/1000ths of an inch thick. The gaps between these 70-ton blocks are 15 times smaller than the width of a hair. The corners are perfect 90-degree angles. The surfaces are smooth enough to reflect light. In 1997, a stonemason named Dennis Stocks attempted to replicate this precision using the tools Egyptologists claim were available during the 4th dynasty: copper saws, wooden mallets, and sand as an abrasive. He worked for weeks. He managed to cut a small cube of granite, roughly the size of a brick, with corners that were off by several millimeters. His tools wore down faster than the stone. The sand abrasive created irregular surfaces. The copper bent. He could not achieve even 1% of the precision found inside the pyramid, and he was cutting a brick, not a 70-ton ceiling beam. The experiment was quietly shelved. The textbooks were not updated. The official story remained unchanged. The Egyptians did this with copper and determination. But here is what they will not tell you in those textbooks. In 2002, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot up the southern shaft of the Queen's chamber. This was not some fringe explorer with a conspiracy theory. This was a legitimate archaeological project approved by the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities. The robot crawled 200 feet into a shaft 8 inches square, and at the end, it found a limestone door with 2 copper handles. The world was watching. National Geographic was filming. This was supposed to be a moment of discovery, a live broadcast that would finally reveal what lay hidden inside the pyramid for over 4,000 years. Dr. Zahi Hawass, then Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, was there. The robot drilled a small hole through the door. A camera pushed through. Behind the first door was a second door. The broadcast ended. The project was shut down. No explanation was given. 9 years passed. In 2011, Hawass announced they would finally explore beyond the second door. Another robot, another drill. This time, no live broadcast. This time, controlled access. The robot went through. On the walls of the space between the first and second doors, they found hieroglyphs painted in red ochre. Not carved, painted. The kind of markings that workers leave. Not the formal inscriptions meant for eternity. No scholar has publicly translated those hieroglyphs. No photographs have been released to independent researchers. The project was sealed, permanently. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities will not discuss it. Requests for access are denied. Permits for independent investigation are rejected. When pressed, the official statement is always the same. There is nothing significant beyond the doors. Just an empty space. Nothing to see. Move along. If there is nothing significant, why seal it forever? If the markings are meaningless, why refuse to translate them? If the second door leads nowhere, Why not open it and prove the skeptics wrong? The pattern repeats throughout the plateau. Every discovery leads to closure. Every breakthrough leads to silence. Every question leads to a wall. In 1984, Robert Bauval and a team of researchers were granted permission to take samples of the mortar used between the pyramid's outer casing stones. Radiocarbon dating would finally settle the question of when the pyramid was built. The results came back from 2 independent laboratories. The mortar was 400 to 1,200 years older than Khufu's reign, not younger, which would make sense if later dynasties had done repairs. Older. The material binding the stones together predated the pharaoh, who supposedly ordered its construction. The study was published in a French archaeological journal. It was referenced once by mainstream Egyptology and then never mentioned again. The Egyptian government did not fund further testing. The samples were not retested. The anomaly was filed away. But you cannot file away the coordinates. You cannot dismiss the precision. You cannot explain the copper handles on a door that no one was ever supposed to open. And here is what makes all of this more than just an interesting historical puzzle. It is still happening. Right now. The cover-up is not some ancient conspiracy from a lost civilization. It is active, institutional, and ongoing. My name is Mr. H, and if you have made it this far, you are already part of a very small group of people willing to ask uncomfortable questions. This is not a channel for people who want easy answers or comforting lies. This is for the ones who can handle the weight of what comes next. If that is you, go ahead and subscribe. Turn on notifications, because what I am about to show you over the next hour will dismantle everything you thought you knew about human history. And fair warning, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The number encoded in the desert is not the only impossible thing about the Great Pyramid. It is just the one they cannot explain away, with ramps and copper tools. There are others, many others, and each one chips away at the foundation of a story we have been told since childhood. A story that requires us to believe Bronze Age workers, with no written records of construction techniques, no blueprints, no engineering manuals, built something that sits on 550 million square feet of bedrock, leveled to within 0.8 of an inch. Something aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree. Something that encodes the dimensions of the Earth, the mathematical constant pi, the golden ratio, and apparently the speed of light. Either the ancient Egyptians possessed knowledge far beyond what we have given them credit for, or someone else built this, and the Egyptians inherited it. The evidence for the second option is overwhelming, and the institutions protecting the first option know it. The official story asks you to believe in a miracle disguised as manual labor. 2.3 million stone blocks. 20 years of construction. That is the timeline Egyptologists have agreed upon. The one printed in textbooks. The one tour guides recite to crowds standing in the desert heat. 20 years to build the Great Pyramid under Pharaoh Khufu's reign. Do the mathematics. 2.3 million blocks divided by 20 years is 115,000 blocks per year. Divide that by 365 days, and you get 315 blocks per day. Assuming they work 12 hours a day, that is 26 blocks per hour. One block every 2¼ minutes. Every 2 minutes and 15 seconds, workers had to quarry a block weighing an average of 2½ tons, transport it to the site, raise it into position, and set it with the kind of precision that leaves gaps smaller than a human hair. They had to do this without wheeled vehicles, without pulleys as we understand them, without iron tools. They had to do it in the blazing Egyptian sun, without machinery, without computers calculating load distribution, without cranes, and they had to do it perfectly. Because if you are off by even a fraction of a degree on the lower courses, the error compounds as you build upward. By the time you reach the apex, the pyramid would be twisted, leaning, structurally unsound. But the Great Pyramid is not twisted. Its base is level to within 1 inch across a footprint of 13 acres. Its sides align with the cardinal directions more accurately than the Greenwich Observatory in London, which was built with telescopes and precision instruments. In 1997, Mark Lehner, one of the most respected Egyptologists in the world and a staunch defender of the traditional timeline, decided to settle the argument once and for all. He partnered with the television program Nova to conduct an experiment. They would build a small pyramid using only the tools and techniques available during the Fourth Dynasty. They recruited 44 workers. They had modern safety equipment, food and water on demand, and a team of engineers advising them on leverage and physics. They were not building a full-scale pyramid. They were attempting to construct a structure 18 feet tall, using blocks that weighed less than half a ton each. It took them 3 weeks to move and place 186 blocks. 3 weeks, 44 people, 186 blocks that weighed a fraction of what the actual pyramid blocks weigh. Now scale that up. The Great Pyramid required 2.3 million blocks, many of them weighing not half a ton but 15 tons, with the granite ceiling beams in the king's chamber weighing 70 tons each. If 44 modern workers with engineering support needed 3 weeks to place 186 small blocks, how long would it take to place 2.3 million blocks using only rope and copper? The answer is longer than 20 years. Much longer. Lena's experiment was supposed to prove the feasibility of the traditional construction narrative. Instead, it revealed the mathematical impossibility. The results were broadcast once and never repeated. The implications were not discussed in academic papers. The experiment was quietly forgotten, but the blocks are still there, stacked with inhuman precision, and the mathematics do not go away just because they are inconvenient. So Egyptologists developed theories to explain how it could have been done. Over the decades, 3 main theories emerged, each attempting to solve the problem of how workers moved millions of tons of stone up a structure that eventually reached 481 feet into the sky. The first theory is the straight ramp, a single ramp leading from the ground to the top of the pyramid, growing longer as the pyramid grows taller. The problem with this theory becomes obvious the moment you calculate the dimensions. To maintain a reasonable incline that workers could actually climb while dragging multi-ton blocks, the ramp would need to be over a mile long by the time it reached the pyramid's peak. The volume of material needed to build that ramp would exceed the volume of the pyramid itself by a factor of 3. You would need to build something 3 times larger than the pyramid just to build the pyramid. And then you would need to dismantle the ramp and remove millions of tons of construction material without leaving any archaeological trace. No such ramp has ever been found. No quarry shows evidence of producing that much extra material. The theory collapses under its own weight. The second theory is the spiral ramp, a ramp that wraps around the pyramid as it rises, like a road winding up a mountain. This solves the length problem but creates a new one. If the ramp wraps around the exterior, it covers the corners of the pyramid. And if the corners are covered, workers cannot check the alignment. Remember, the pyramid's base is aligned to true north within 3/60ths of a degree. That kind of precision requires constant measurement and adjustment as you build upward. You cannot achieve it if your measuring points are buried under a construction ramp. The spiral ramp theory requires workers to build blind, hoping they are maintaining perfect alignment without being able to verify it until the very end. No engineer would accept that risk. No architect would design it that way. The third theory is the internal ramp, a ramp built inside the pyramid itself, spiraling upward through passages that were later filled in or hidden. This is the most recent theory, proposed by French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin in 2005. It is elegant, it solves many of the logistical problems, and it is testable. Houdin requested permission to use non-invasive scanning technology to search for evidence of internal voids that would confirm his theory. Ground-penetrating radar, microgravity surveys, thermal imaging, technologies that do not damage the structure, that simply look inside the stone to see if hidden passages exist. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities denied the request. No explanation, no counteroffer to conduct the tests under their supervision, just a flat rejection. If Houdin is wrong, proving it would strengthen the traditional narrative and discredit alternative theories. If he is right, it would be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the century and would bring enormous prestige to everyone involved. Either outcome benefits the authorities, unless, of course, the authorities already know what is inside and do not want anyone else to find out. The ramp theories all fail for another reason that is rarely discussed: the source of the stone. The limestone blocks that make up most of the pyramid's mass were quarried locally, from the Giza plateau itself. That part is accepted. But the granite used in the king's chamber, the ceiling beams, the sarcophagus, came from Aswan, 500 miles south. 70-ton granite beams transported 500 miles across a landscape with no roads, no railroads, no infrastructure designed for that kind of haulage. The official explanation is that they floated the blocks down the Nile during the flood season when the river was high. They built massive wooden barges, loaded them with dozens of tons of granite, and sailed north to Giza. Show me the boats. In 1954, archaeologists discovered a disassembled boat buried in a pit near the Great Pyramid. It is called the Khufu ship, and it is beautifully preserved. When reconstructed, it measured 143 feet long. It is made of cedar wood, carefully joined without nails. a masterpiece of ancient shipbuilding. It could not carry 70 tons of granite. Naval engineers have analyzed the design. The maximum load capacity, assuming perfect conditions and a calm river, is approximately 15 tons. That is less than a quarter of what a single ceiling beam weighs. To transport all the granite needed for the King's Chamber alone, you would need dozens of these ships, all perfectly constructed, all successfully navigating 500 miles of river without sinking. No evidence of such a fleet exists. No boat fragments. No dock facilities at Aswan large enough to load that kind of cargo. No docks at Giza designed to receive it. The infrastructure required for this operation would have been enormous, employing thousands of workers, requiring vast amounts of timber in a country with very few trees, and it would have left archaeological evidence everywhere. There is none. Egyptologists point to the Khufu ship as proof that the ancient Egyptians had the naval technology, but the Khufu ship proves the opposite. It shows they had sophisticated boat-building skills, and that those skills were not sufficient for the task the official story requires. Someone is lying. Either the boats existed, and every trace of them vanished, or the granite was moved by a method we do not understand and cannot replicate. There is a third option, one that fits all the evidence but requires accepting something uncomfortable. The granite was already there. The pyramid was not built in 20 years during Khufu's reign. It was built over a much longer period, possibly centuries, possibly by people who had technologies we have not yet rediscovered. And here is the part they really do not want you to know. In 1984, when researchers radiocarbon dated the mortar between the pyramid stones, the results were not just slightly off. They were 400 to 1,200 years older than Khufu's reign. The organic material binding those stones together came from trees that were cut down before Khufu was born. That study was published. It was peer-reviewed. It was scientifically valid. And then it was buried under silence. The Egyptian government never commissioned follow-up tests. No mainstream Egyptologist has seriously engaged with the findings. The results were dismissed as contamination, as error, as anything other than what they actually suggest. That the Great Pyramid is older than the Fourth Dynasty, older than Khufu, older than the comfortable timeline that keeps textbooks simple and tourism thriving. The mathematics do not work, the ramps do not work, the boats do not work, the timeline does not work, but the pyramid stands, perfectly aligned, impossibly precise, waiting for someone to admit that the story we have been told is not just incomplete, it is deliberately false. Before we go deeper into what that precision actually means, I want to know something. Where are you right now? What city, what country, what corner of the world is listening to this? And more importantly, what time is it where you are? Are you watching this at 3 a.m, unable to sleep because these questions won't leave you alone? Or maybe it is your lunch break and you are supposed to be doing something else but you cannot stop listening. Drop your location and the time in the comments. I want to see how far this conversation reaches, because what we are talking about here is not just ancient history. This is about waking up to a reality that most people will never question, and I want to know who else is awake. Strip away the theories, the academic arguments, the institutional denials, and you are left with something that cannot be explained away with clever rhetoric, numbers that do not lie. The Great Pyramid is not just a pile of stones arranged in a vaguely triangular shape. It is a mathematical statement frozen in limestone and granite, encoding relationships that took humanity thousands of years to rediscover. And the people who built it knew you would eventually figure that out. Start with pi. If you measure the perimeter of the pyramid's base and divide it by twice the height, you get 3.14159. That is pi, accurate to 5 decimal places. The ratio appears naturally in the structure's design, not as decoration or symbolism, but as a fundamental proportion governing its dimensions. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The earliest known written approximation of pi comes from the Rind mathematical papyrus, dated to around 1650 BC. That is roughly 1,000 years after Khufu's reign, 1,000 years after the pyramid was supposedly built. The papyrus gives pi as approximately 3.16, which is close but not particularly accurate. The pyramid encodes pi to 3.14159, 5 times more accurate than the best mathematical knowledge Egypt would possess a millennium later. Either the pyramid builders knew pi with extraordinary precision, and then their civilization somehow forgot that knowledge for 1,000 years, or the pyramid predates our entire understanding of when mathematical constants were discovered. Mainstream Egyptologists argue it is coincidence. The proportions just happen to work out that way. The builders were not encoding pi deliberately. They were following aesthetic principles that accidentally resulted in a pi ratio. Let us test that argument. Take the golden ratio, phi, which is 1.618. You find phi throughout nature, in the spiral of a nautilus shell, in the proportions of DNA molecules, in the structure of galaxies. It is a universal constant that governs growth patterns and aesthetic harmony across scales from quantum to cosmic. The pyramid encodes phi as deliberately as it encodes pi. Measure the slant height of the pyramid, the distance from the base corner to the apex along the face. Now measure half the base length. Divide the slant height by half the base. The answer is 1.618. Phi. The golden ratio. This appears not once but repeatedly throughout the structure. The height of the pyramid, divided by half the base length, also gives you phi. The relationship shows up in the internal chambers, in the angles of the passages, in proportions that any mathematician will recognize immediately. Two universal constants, pi and phi, encoded in a structure supposedly built by people whose written mathematics could not accurately calculate either one, not approximately encoded, precisely encoded. The kind of precision that requires understanding what these ratios mean, where they appear in nature, why they matter. And it gets stranger. Multiply the height of the pyramid by 43,200, and you get the polar radius of Earth, 3,963 miles, accurate to within a fraction of a percent. Multiply the perimeter of the base by 43,200, and you get the equatorial circumference of Earth at the equator, 24,902 miles. Again, accurate to within a fraction of a percent. Why 43,200? Because there are 86,400 seconds in a day. 43,200 is half of that, representing the 12-hour division of time that appears across ancient cultures. Whoever built the pyramid knew the dimensions of the planet to a degree of accuracy that would not be matched until we had satellites in orbit. They knew Earth's circumference. They knew its polar radius. They knew these measurements differed because Earth is not a perfect sphere but an oblate spheroid, slightly flattened at the poles. And they encoded that knowledge in stone, using a scaling factor based on the division of the day into hours and seconds. This is not primitive architecture. This is geodetic engineering. Graham Hancock has spent decades arguing that this level of knowledge could only come from a lost civilization that had already achieved what we would consider advanced status. A civilization that mapped the Earth, understood celestial mechanics, developed sophisticated mathematics, and then vanished, leaving behind monuments that would preserve their knowledge for whoever came next. The academic establishment calls him a pseudoscientist, but they cannot refute the measurements. The numbers are there, carved in stone, verified by laser surveying equipment that did not exist until the 21st century. And there is more. The shafts in the king's chamber point to specific stars, not random stars, not symbolically important stars, specific stars at a specific time. The southern shaft aligns with Orion's belt. The northern shaft aligns with Thuban, the pole star, except they do not align with where those stars were in 2560 BC, when Khufu supposedly built the pyramid. They align with where those stars were in 10,500 BC. Robert Bauval spent years working out the Orion correlation theory, demonstrating that the three pyramids of Giza match the position of the three stars in Orion's belt, not as they appeared during the 4th dynasty, but as they appeared over 12,000 years ago. Computer simulations of ancient skies confirm it. The alignment is precise. The date is undeniable. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities dismisses the Orion correlation theory as speculative. They argue the alignment is coincidental, that Bauval is seeing patterns that do not exist. But the precession of the equinoxes is not speculative. It is astronomy. The stars move in predictable cycles over thousands of years. You can calculate exactly where any star was at any point in history. And when you do that calculation for the shafts in the king's chamber, they point to 10,500 BC. Why would builders in 2560 BC orient shafts to point at stars as they appeared 8,000 years earlier? What possible reason would they have to encode a date that predates their entire civilization? Unless they were not encoding a construction date, they were encoding a message about when something else happened, an event, a catastrophe, a beginning or an ending that they wanted future generations to remember. The Younger Dryas impact event occurred around 10,800 BC. It was a global cataclysm. Temperatures plummeted, ice sheets advanced. Megafauna went extinct across multiple continents. Sea levels rose as ice melted. flooding coastal regions where human populations had settled. Entire civilizations could have been wiped out, their knowledge lost, their monuments drowned beneath oceans that rose 400 feet in a matter of centuries. If survivors of that cataclysm wanted to preserve knowledge, they would build something that could withstand another catastrophe. They would encode information in the most permanent form possible. Stone, mathematics, astronomical alignments that remain accurate regardless of language or culture. They would build exactly what stands on the Giza plateau, the Fibonacci sequence, where each number is the sum of the two preceding ones, appears in the internal dimensions of the pyramid's chambers. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. You find this sequence everywhere in nature. The branching of trees, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the spiral of a hurricane. It is a mathematical pattern that emerges from the simplest recursive rule, yet it governs growth and form across the natural world. The descending passage is 105.3 meters long. The ascending passage is 39.2 meters. The Grand Gallery is 47.8 meters. These are not arbitrary measurements. They relate to each other through Fibonacci ratios. The chambers themselves, their heights and widths, echo the same proportional relationships. This is not something you stumble into while eyeballing dimensions with a rope and a plumb bob. This is intentional design based on deep mathematical understanding. And it raises an unavoidable question. If the ancient Egyptians possessed this level of mathematical sophistication, where is the evidence of its development? Mathematics does not appear fully formed. It evolves. You can trace the development of calculus through centuries of work by dozens of mathematicians building on each other's insights. You can follow the evolution of algebra from Babylonian clay tablets through Islamic scholars to Renaissance Europe. There is a paper trail, a progression, evidence of iteration and refinement. Egyptian mathematics, as preserved in papyri like the Rhind and Moscow mathematical texts, shows competence in practical arithmetic and basic geometry. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, calculating the area of fields, the volume of granaries, useful knowledge for administration and construction, but nothing approaching the sophistication required to encode pi, phi, Fibonacci sequences, and Earth's dimensions into a single structure. Where are the intermediate steps? Where are the treatises on advanced geometry? Where are the astronomical tables calculating precession? Where are the surveying records showing how they measured the planet? They do not exist. It is as if someone handed the Egyptians a completed blueprint and said, "Build this." And they did, perhaps not fully understanding what they were building, perhaps knowing only that it was sacred, that it had been standing there for longer than their oldest records could confirm. The mathematics embedded in the pyramid are not Egyptian. They are universal. They are the kind of knowledge any advanced civilization would develop, regardless of culture or language. Pi is the same whether discovered in ancient Egypt, medieval China, or modern America. The golden ratio appears in Greek architecture, Renaissance painting, and the structure of DNA. These are not cultural artifacts, they are cosmic constants. And that is exactly what you would encode if you wanted to communicate across the boundaries of time and catastrophe. You would not write in hieroglyphs that might be forgotten or languages that might evolve into incomprehensibility. You would write in mathematics, the only truly universal language, the one tongue that any intelligent species must learn if they want to understand the physical universe. The pyramid does not say who built it or when or why in words you can read, but it says something far more important in numbers that cannot be misunderstood. We knew what you know, we understood what you understand, and we encoded that knowledge here, so that even if everything else is lost, this will remain. It is a message in a bottle thrown across an ocean of time, and we are only beginning to read it. Before there was a pyramid, before there was Egypt as we know it, there was the Sphinx. It sits where it has always sat, carved directly from the bedrock of the Giza plateau, a creature that belongs to no single era, staring eastward toward the sunrise with eyes that have watched the world change in ways we can barely comprehend. For over a century, Egyptologists have insisted it was carved during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC, by Pharaoh Khafre as a companion piece to his pyramid. The evidence for this claim is a statue found nearby, and the assumption that the face resembles Khafre's features. That is it. No inscriptions, no dedicatory texts, no royal cartouches, just proximity and a guess about facial features on a monument whose face has been so weathered and damaged that determining whose likeness it might originally have held is pure speculation. But there is other evidence, evidence that does not rely on guesswork or assumptions, evidence written into the stone itself by forces that do not care about academic consensus. In 1991, a geologist named Robert Schoch stood in the Sphinx enclosure and saw something that every Egyptologist who had come before him had somehow missed or chosen to ignore. He was not looking at the Sphinx as a historical artifact or a piece of royal propaganda. He was looking at it as a geologist looks at stone, reading the marks left by time, weather, and erosion. What he saw did not match the story he had been told. The walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the deep trench carved into the bedrock from which the Sphinx itself was shaped, show a specific type of weathering pattern. Deep vertical fissures, undulating surfaces, rounded corners. These are not the marks of wind erosion, which creates horizontal striations and sharp edges. These are not the patterns you see on structures that have spent millennia in a desert environment. These are the unmistakable signatures of water erosion, heavy, sustained rainfall flowing down vertical rock faces for centuries, carving channels, smoothing surfaces, creating the distinctive scalloped patterns that geologists recognize immediately. Schoch is not an amateur. He holds a doctorate in geology from Yale. He has spent his career studying how stone weathers under different environmental conditions. When he examined the Sphinx enclosure, his conclusion was definitive. The weathering patterns are consistent with prolonged exposure to significant rainfall, not the kind of brief desert storms that occasionally pass through modern Egypt, but the intense monsoon rains that fell on North Africa during the African humid period. The last time the Giza plateau experienced that kind of rainfall was between 7,000 and 9,000 BC, at least 5,000 years before Khufu supposedly carved the Sphinx. The academic response was immediate and defensive. Mark Lehner, the same Egyptologist whose experiment failed to replicate pyramid construction techniques, proposed an alternative explanation: dew erosion. He argued that moisture from morning dew, combined with wind and sand, could create similar patterns over thousands of years. Schoch invited Lehner to show him a single other example anywhere in Egypt where dew had created vertical erosion channels several feet deep. Lehner could not, because dew does not do that. Dew creates surface weathering, mineral deposits, minor pitting. It does not carve channels into limestone. It does not create the kind of differential erosion visible in the Sphinx enclosure, where protected areas show dramatically less weathering than exposed surfaces. The debate should have ended there. But careers were at stake, reputations, the entire chronology of Egyptian civilization. If the Sphinx is 7,000 years old or older, it predates the invention of writing, the development of complex society, the rise of the first dynasties. It belongs to an era when, according to accepted history, humans were living in scattered settlements, hunting and gathering, not carving 66-foot-tall monuments from solid bedrock. So the academic establishment did what it always does when confronted with evidence that threatens the narrative. It attacked the messenger. Schoch was dismissed as a fringe theorist, despite his credentials. His findings were labeled pseudoscience, despite being based on standard geological analysis, and the weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure remain unexplained by any mainstream Egyptologist to this day. But there is more, much more. In 1858, French archaeologist Auguste Mariette uncovered a limestone stele buried in the sand near the Sphinx. It is known as the Inventory Stela, and it contains an inscription that should have rewritten everything we thought we knew about Giza. The text describes Pharaoh Khufu visiting the Sphinx and finding it already buried in sand. It states that Khufu ordered the monument excavated and restored. It mentions temples built near the Sphinx to honor the guardian that was already ancient when Khufu arrived. Read that again. Khufu, the pharaoh credited with building the Great Pyramid, and supposedly the Sphinx, is described in his own inscriptions as someone who found these monuments, not someone who built them. The academic response? The stela is a forgery. It was carved over 1,000 years after Khufu's reign, by priests who wanted to glorify the past, or serve some political agenda that scholars cannot quite identify, but are certain must exist. This dismissal creates its own problems. Egyptian priests spent enormous effort inflating the achievements of pharaohs, not diminishing them. Royal propaganda always exaggerated, always claimed divine inspiration and unprecedented accomplishments. The entire function of monumental inscriptions was to make pharaohs look more powerful, more connected to the gods, more deserving of eternal worship. Why would a priest fabricate a text that turns Khufu from a godlike builder into a mere caretaker? Why invent a story that strips away glory and replaces it with humility? It makes no sense within the context of Egyptian royal ideology unless the story is true. Unless the Sphinx was already there, already ancient, already sacred, and Khufu's actual achievement was restoring and honoring something he recognized as far older than himself. There is supporting evidence for this. The Dream Stela, erected by Pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1400 BC, describes how the Sphinx appeared to him in a dream and asked to be freed from the sand that had buried it once again. Thutmose cleared the sand and was rewarded with the throne of Egypt. The text explicitly describes the Sphinx as ancient, even in Thutmose's time, a relic from an earlier age that required preservation. Multiple pharaohs across multiple dynasties describe finding the Sphinx buried and restoring it. None claim to have built it. Not one. And then there is the head. Look at the Sphinx from any angle, and you will notice something strange. The proportions are wrong. The head is too small for the body. Sculptors do not make that kind of mistake, especially not when carving a monument of this scale. Human proportions are well understood. If you are going to carve a human-headed lion, you make the head proportional to the body, unless the head is not original. Colin Reeder, a geological engineer who has studied the Sphinx extensively, noticed that the weathering patterns on the head are different from those on the body. The head shows erosion consistent with desert conditions, wind, sand, the kind of weathering you would expect from a few thousand years in an arid climate. The body shows the deep water erosion that Shoak identified. This suggests the head was recarved at a later date from a larger original form, and if the original head was larger and proportional to the body, what shape was it? Not human. The Sphinx enclosure, the body, everything below the neck, points to a monument originally carved as a full lion, aligned to face the sunrise at the spring equinox. A solar guardian, a symbol of the constellation Leo, marking an astronomical alignment that mattered to whoever built it. At some point, perhaps during the 4th dynasty, perhaps later, a pharaoh ordered the lion's head recarved into a human face, possibly his own, as a way of claiming ownership of a monument he did not build but wanted associated with his reign. The recarving reduced the size of the head, destroying the original proportions, but it allowed the pharaoh to stamp his identity onto something already recognized as sacred and ancient. This is not speculation. This is what the physical evidence shows. A body weathered by water that has not fallen in 7,000 years. A head weathered by desert conditions. Inscriptions describing restoration, not construction. And an academic establishment so committed to the conventional timeline that it will dismiss geological evidence, ignore primary sources, and refuse to investigate further, rather than admit the Sphinx is older than Egypt itself. The creature staring at the sunrise has been watching longer than we have been civilized. It was already ancient when the first hieroglyphs were carved. It was already a mystery when the pharaohs arrived and decided it was theirs. And the question it poses has never been answered. If the Sphinx predates the Egyptians, who had the knowledge and resources to carve it? And why does every institution with the power to investigate refuse to do so? The monuments you can see are not the whole story. Beneath the sand, beneath the limestone bedrock, beneath the foundations of the pyramids and the Sphinx, there is another Giza, a hidden architecture of chambers, tunnels, and voids that most visitors will never know exists because most visitors are never told. In 1932, a man named Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, made a prediction that would haunt Egyptology for decades. While in a trance state, he described a hall of records buried beneath the right paw of the Sphinx. According to Cayce, this chamber contained the complete history of Atlantis, records of advanced technologies, and knowledge preserved by survivors of a global catastrophe that destroyed their civilization around 10,500 BC. Mainstream archaeology dismissed Cayce as a charlatan. His predictions were filed under mysticism and ignored by serious researchers. The Hall of Records became a joke, the kind of thing conspiracy theorists talked about, but no credible scientist would waste time investigating. Then, in 1993, a geophysicist named Thomas Debicki conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys around the Sphinx. He was not looking for Cayce's Hall of Records. He was conducting legitimate geological research, mapping subsurface anomalies to understand the bedrock composition of the plateau. What he found was a rectangular cavity, approximately 9 feet by 12 feet, located 25 feet beneath the front paws of the Sphinx. The cavity was not natural. Natural voids in limestone are irregular, following the dissolution patterns of water through porous rock. This was geometric, rectangular, the kind of shape that requires intentional excavation. Debicki published his findings. The data was peer-reviewed, The anomaly was confirmed by independent analysis. Here was evidence, obtained through modern scientific instrumentation, that there was indeed a chamber beneath the Sphinx, exactly where Casey had said it would be 60 years earlier. Dr. Zahi Hawass was asked about excavating the chamber. His response was immediate and final. No. No excavation would be permitted. No further ground-penetrating radar surveys would be authorized. The anomaly, whatever it was, would remain undisturbed. When pressed for a reason, Hawass stated that disturbing the area might damage the Sphinx. But ground-penetrating radar is non-invasive. It does not require drilling or excavation. And if there is nothing down there, proving it empty would silence the conspiracy theorists forever and strengthen the conventional narrative, unless they already know what is down there and cannot allow it to be confirmed. The Sphinx is not the only place where discoveries lead to locked doors. In 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink's robot discovered the sealed door in the Queen's chamber shaft. Copper handles, deliberate construction, a door that someone intended to close and keep closed. After 9 years of bureaucratic delay, another expedition was finally approved in 2002. The entire event was broadcast live on Fox television. National Geographic was there. This was supposed to be a moment of transparency, proof that Egyptian authorities were open to exploration and discovery. The robot drilled through the door. A camera pushed through the hole. Behind the first door was a small space, then a second door. The broadcast ended. The project was shut down. 9 more years passed. In 2011, Hawass announced that they would finally see what was beyond the second door. This time, no live broadcast. This time, controlled media access. The robot went through. The team saw what was there, and then the entire project was permanently sealed. The official statement: there is nothing significant beyond the doors, just an empty space. The hieroglyphs painted on the walls between the doors are meaningless workers' marks. If that is true, why not publish photographs of the hieroglyphs so independent scholars can verify the translation? Why not allow other teams to examine the space and confirm there is nothing significant? Why seal it forever if there is nothing to hide? The pattern is clear. Every attempt to explore beneath or within the monuments of Giza ends the same way. Discovery, followed by closure, followed by silence. In 1999, Hawass announced the discovery of a vertical shaft beneath the causeway connecting the Sphinx to the pyramids. He called it the Osiris Shaft, claiming it was a symbolic tomb dedicated to the god of the underworld. The shaft descends over 100 feet through 3 levels of chambers before reaching a final room flooded with groundwater. At the bottom, submerged, is a massive granite sarcophagus. The discovery was featured in a documentary. Cameras descended into the shaft, showing the intricate construction, the pillars supporting the chambers, the precision stonework that mirrors the quality found in the pyramids above. And then, access was restricted. The shaft was closed to independent researchers. No comprehensive survey of the chambers was ever published. No analysis of the sarcophagus was conducted. Rumors began to circulate among the small community of researchers who had managed to visit the Osiris Shaft before it was sealed. They reported strange electromagnetic readings inside the chambers, compasses behaving erratically, unusual acoustic properties that made voices sound distorted, and directional sense unreliable. Several explorers mentioned feeling nauseous and disoriented after spending time in the lower chambers, symptoms they could not explain. Hawass dismissed these reports as the overactive imaginations of people predisposed to see mystery where none exists. But he also refused to allow any scientific team to conduct proper electromagnetic surveys or acoustic analysis. The Osiris Shaft remains off-limits, its true purpose unknown, its contents unexamined, and it is not the only tunnel system beneath Giza. Between 1973 and 1974, a team led by Lambert Dolphin from the Stanford Research Institute conducted the most comprehensive geophysical survey of the Giza Plateau ever attempted. Using seismic reflection, resistivity mapping, and electromagnetic sounding, they searched for hidden chambers and tunnel systems beneath the surface. Their preliminary findings were extraordinary. The data showed evidence of multiple subsurface anomalies, voids that appeared to be chambers, linear features consistent with tunnels, areas of disturbed bedrock suggesting excavation. Some of these anomalies were directly beneath the pyramids. Others extended outward, forming what looked like a network connecting different parts of the plateau. The team prepared a detailed report recommending specific locations for further investigation. They identified several high-priority targets where excavation would most likely reveal significant archaeological features. The Egyptian government thanked them for their work and then refused to authorize any follow-up. The high-priority targets were never excavated, the anomalies were never investigated, and when researchers have asked to see the complete data from the Stanford survey, they have been told that much of it was lost or is unavailable for review. In 2008, British researcher Andrew Collins was investigating historical accounts of cave systems beneath Giza. Local tradition spoke of tunnels that predated the pyramids, passages used by ancient priests for rituals, entrances hidden in the bedrock that had been sealed or forgotten over centuries. Collins located one of these entrances, a narrow shaft descending into the rock northwest of the Great Pyramid. He explored the passage with a small team, documenting a series of chambers cut into the stone, some showing evidence of ancient tool marks, others appearing naturally formed but modified by human hands. He published his findings, complete with photographs and GPS coordinates. Egyptian authorities arrived within weeks and sealed the entrance with concrete. No official explanation was given. No archaeological team was sent to document the site before it was permanently closed. Collins' discovery simply vanished from the official record as if it had never existed. Every discovery follows the same pattern. Radar shows anomalies. Authorities deny access. Someone finds an entrance. Authorities seal it. A chamber is documented. Authorities close it. Again and again. The response is not curiosity or scientific investigation, but containment and concealment. What is beneath Giza that requires this level of protection? The Hall of Records that Edgar Cayce described, whether you believe in his psychic abilities or not, would be devastating to the official narrative. A chamber containing pre-dynastic records, evidence of advanced knowledge predating Egyptian civilization, proof that the monuments were built by someone else, would invalidate a century of Egyptology and force a complete rewriting of human history. That is a prize worth protecting, and the best way to protect it is to ensure it is never officially discovered. Keep it buried, deny the anomalies, seal the entrances, control access so thoroughly that independent verification becomes impossible. The Giza Plateau is not just an archaeological site. It is a controlled information environment where discoveries are managed, evidence is filtered, and the narrative is maintained at all costs. Above ground, the pyramids and Sphinx stand as testaments to something we do not fully understand. Below ground, there is more, much more, and every locked door, every sealed shaft, every denied permit is an admission that those in power know exactly what they are protecting. The question is no longer whether there are secrets beneath Giza. The question is, what happens when those secrets can no longer be contained? There is a story older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older than any civilization we have names for. It survives not in stone or papyrus, but in the collective memory of humanity, told and retold across cultures that had no contact with each other, separated by oceans and millennia, yet somehow remembering the same catastrophe. The Greeks called it Atlantis. In 360 BC, the philosopher Plato wrote two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, describing a sophisticated maritime civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time. He claimed the story came from Solon, the Athenian lawmaker, who heard it from Egyptian priests during his travels to Sais in the Nile Delta. According to these priests, Atlantis was an advanced society of architects, astronomers, and engineers who had mastered metallurgy, agriculture, and navigation. They built on a scale that rivaled the gods, constructing concentric rings of water and land, temples covered in precious metals, and a capital city of such grandeur that it became the envy of the ancient world. And then, in a single day and night, it sank beneath the waves. For over 2,000 years, scholars have debated whether Atlantis was real or allegory. The mainstream view is that Plato invented it as a moral tale about hubris and divine punishment. There was no lost civilization. There was no advanced society predating Egypt and Greece. It was fiction, pure and simple. But Plato insisted it was history. He went out of his way to emphasize that the story was not myth, but an account passed down through reliable sources, from Egyptian priests who kept meticulous records, to Solon, who was known for his integrity, to Plato's own family who preserved the tale. Why would a philosopher known for using obvious allegories like the cave suddenly pretend that one particular story was factual if he meant it as parable? And here is what makes dismissing Atlantis more difficult than the skeptics want to admit. The timeline Plato gives matches geological evidence of a real global catastrophe. 9,000 years before Solon puts the destruction of Atlantis around 9,600 BC. That date falls within a period geologists call the Younger Dryas, a dramatic climate anomaly that began around 10,800 BC and ended abruptly around 9,600 BC. For over 1,000 years, global temperatures plummeted. Ice sheets that had been retreating suddenly advanced. Entire ecosystems collapsed. And then, in what geological terms call an instant, it ended. The warming was so rapid that ice cores show temperature increases of 15 degrees Fahrenheit within a single decade. Massive ice sheets covering North America and Europe melted catastrophically. Sea levels rose over 400 feet. Coastlines where humans had lived for thousands of years vanished beneath the ocean. Any civilization that had developed along those coasts, any cities built on what was once dry land, would have been utterly destroyed. In 2007, a team of scientists, led by Richard Firestone, published evidence of an extraterrestrial impact at the beginning of the Younger Dryas. They found a layer of sediment across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia containing high concentrations of iridium, microscopic diamonds, and spherules consistent with an asteroid or comet impact. The impact would have triggered massive wildfires, ejected dust into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, and destabilized ice sheets, causing rapid melting and flooding. This was not a localized disaster. This was a planetary reset button. 35 species of megafauna went extinct in North America alone. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, all gone within a few centuries. Human populations crashed. Archaeological sites show a dramatic decline in activity. The Clovis culture, which had spread across North America, effectively vanished from the record. If there was an advanced maritime civilization at that time, one that had established coastal cities and trade networks, it would have been obliterated. The survivors, if there were any, would have fled inland, carrying whatever knowledge they could preserve, arriving as refugees in regions that were just beginning to develop agriculture and settled life. And that is exactly what legends from around the world describe. The Sumerians told of the Apkallu, 7 sages who emerged after a great flood and taught humanity the arts of civilization: writing, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, law. The Hindu Vedas speak of the Saptarishi, 7 sages who preserved knowledge through a cataclysm and re-established Dharma in a broken world. The Egyptians had the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, mysterious figures who brought wisdom in the distant past and founded the traditions that would become Egyptian religion. These are not gods. The texts describe them as human, or at least human-like, possessing extraordinary knowledge but mortal. They are teachers, not creators. They arrive after disaster and provide the tools for rebuilding. Graham Hancock has spent decades connecting these threads, arguing that the gods remembered in global mythology were survivors of a pre-flood civilization, refugees from a catastrophe who spread across the world, bringing the knowledge that would jumpstart the Neolithic Revolution. Agriculture did not evolve slowly through trial and error in isolated regions. It appeared suddenly, within a few centuries, in multiple locations around the globe: the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to 9,600 BC, exactly when the Younger Dryas ended, is not a primitive site. It is a complex of massive stone pillars, weighing up to 20 tons each, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. The site required organization, planning, and engineering knowledge that supposedly did not exist yet. Hunter-gatherers do not build temples. They do not move multi-ton stones. They do not coordinate labor on that scale, unless they were not primitive hunter-gatherers, unless they were survivors rebuilding, guided by knowledge that predated the catastrophe. On the other side of the world, the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan sits submerged beneath 60 feet of water. Its terraces, right angles, and carved features suggest artificial construction, though mainstream archaeologists insist it is a natural formation selectively highlighted by imagination. But sea level data shows that area was above water until approximately 10,000 years ago. If Yonaguni is artificial, it predates the pyramids by over 7,000 years. In Bolivia, the ruins of Pumapunku feature andesite blocks cut with precision that modern stonemasons struggle to replicate. The blocks interlock with complex joints, some featuring perfectly flat surfaces over 6 feet long, others with angles and grooves that required advanced understanding of geometry. Conventional dating places Pumapunku around 500 CE, but the precision suggests knowledge far beyond what the Tiwanaku culture is credited with possessing. Alternative researchers argue the site is much older, built by a pre-Columbian civilization with technological capabilities we have not acknowledged. In Indonesia, Gunung Padang is a megalithic site that recent surveys suggest may contain buried structures dating back 20,000 years or more. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography show layers of construction descending deep into the hillside, with the oldest layers predating the last ice age. Indonesian authorities initially supported the research, then abruptly halted excavation when the implications became clear. The pattern repeats globally: precision stonework, astronomical alignments, sudden appearance of advanced techniques with no developmental precursor, and academic institutions insisting these are isolated achievements by unrelated cultures who coincidentally discovered similar methods around the same time. Or, there was a single source, a maritime civilization that had mapped the world during the Ice Age, when sea levels were lower and coastlines extended far beyond their current positions. A culture that understood astronomy, navigation, engineering, and mathematics, that established settlements and trade routes across continents. And when the ice melted and the seas rose, that civilization drowned, leaving only scattered remnants on high ground, and survivors who carried fragments of knowledge to whoever would listen. The flood myths support this. Over 200 cultures, many with no historical contact, preserve stories of a world-ending deluge. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes Utnapishtim surviving a flood sent by the gods, preserving animals and seeds on a massive boat. The Bible tells of Noah and the Ark. Hindu texts describe Manu, warned by a fish god, building a ship to survive the waters that covered the earth. Greek mythology preserves the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the sole survivors of a flood sent by Zeus. Aztec legends speak of Coxcoxtli, who built a vessel and repopulated the world after the waters receded. These are not metaphors. They are cultural memories of a real event, distorted by time and retelling but preserving the core truth. The world flooded, most people died, a few survived, and started over. The Great Pyramid encodes the date, 9600 BC, in its astronomical alignments. The Sphinx shows water erosion from rainfall that ended around 7000 BC. Both monuments point to a time before Egypt, before the dynasties, before hieroglyphs. They point to Atlantis, not as Plato described it in every detail, not necessarily as an island in the Atlantic, but as a pre-flood civilization that possessed knowledge encoded into monuments designed to survive the catastrophe they saw coming. The pyramid is not a tomb. It is a time capsule, a message from Atlantis to whoever came next, built by survivors who knew the world could end again and wanted to ensure that certain knowledge would not be lost a second time. And the institutions that control access to these sites know it. They know what the evidence suggests. They know what radiocarbon dating shows, what geological analysis proves, what astronomical alignments indicate. And they have made a deliberate choice to suppress that evidence, because admitting Atlantis was real means admitting human history is cyclical, not linear. It means progress is not guaranteed. It means we are not the first advanced civilization, and we might not be the last. That is a truth the establishment cannot afford to acknowledge, so they lock the doors, seal the chambers, dismiss the evidence, and hope the monuments stay silent. But stone does not forget, and eventually, someone will ask the right questions loudly enough that silence is no longer an option. Sound does something strange inside the Great Pyramid. In 2010, an acoustic engineer named John Stuart Reid was granted rare access to the King's Chamber for a series of experiments that would never be officially repeated. Reid specializes in cymatics, the study of how sound creates physical patterns in matter. He has spent his career analyzing how frequencies interact with materials, how resonance can focus energy, and how ancient structures might have been designed with acoustic properties that modern science is only beginning to understand. What he discovered inside the King's Chamber was not supposed to be possible. The room resonates at a fundamental frequency of 438 Hz. That is close to the musical note A, specifically A438, which some researchers call the natural tuning of the universe. When you produce sound at that frequency inside the chamber, the entire space amplifies it. The granite walls vibrate, the air itself seems to thicken, and the resonance does not dissipate the way it should in a normal room. It sustains, building on itself, creating standing waves that concentrate energy in specific locations. Reid brought tuning forks, frequency generators, and recording equipment. He tested multiple frequencies, mapping how sound behaved in the space. 438 Hz was not the only resonant frequency, but it was the strongest, the most stable, the one that seemed intentionally designed into the chamber's dimensions. The ceiling beams, those 70-ton granite slabs, cut with inhuman precision, are not just structural, they are tuned. Each beam, when struck, produces a specific tone. Together, they form a harmonic series, a musical scale locked into stone. This is not something that happens by accident. You do not randomly stack blocks and end up with a musical instrument. Someone calculated the mass, density, and dimensions of each beam to produce exact frequencies. The Grand Gallery, the ascending passage leading to the King's Chamber, has even stranger properties. Its walls are not parallel. They corbel inward as they rise, creating a shape that acousticians recognize as a resonance chamber. Sound entering the Grand Gallery from below is funneled upward, amplified by the geometry, and directed into the King's Chamber with increasing intensity. It is a megaphone built into the architecture, focusing acoustic energy toward a specific destination. Why would a tomb need acoustic amplification? Why would anyone designing a burial chamber care about resonant frequencies and harmonic tuning, unless it was never a tomb? Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer who has spent decades studying the Great Pyramid, proposes something radical. The structure was a machine, not a symbolic machine, not a metaphorical device representing cosmic order. An actual functioning machine designed to convert energy from one form to another. Dunn's hypothesis centers on the granite beams in the King's Chamber. Granite contains high concentrations of quartz crystal, and quartz is piezoelectric. When you apply mechanical stress to quartz, it generates an electrical charge. When you apply an electrical charge to quartz, it vibrates. This property makes quartz essential in modern electronics. Every watch, computer, and radio relies on quartz oscillators to maintain precise timing. The granite beams in the King's Chamber contain millions of quartz crystals. If those beams were subjected to rhythmic mechanical stress, they would generate electrical current, and if the chamber was designed to focus acoustic energy at specific resonant frequencies, that sound would provide exactly the kind of mechanical stress needed to activate the piezoelectric effect. Sound goes in, electricity comes out. Dunn goes further. He argues that the shafts leading from the King's Chamber, which Egyptologists claim were aligned with stars for symbolic purposes, were actually conduits for chemical reactions. The southern shaft shows traces of salt deposits and chemical residues that do not match anything else in the pyramid. Laboratory analysis identified hydrated zinc chloride and hydrochloric acid, substances that could have been part of a chemical process generating hydrogen. Hydrogen is flammable, but when burned in a controlled environment, it produces only water vapor and releases significant energy. If the pyramid's internal chambers were designed to facilitate chemical reactions producing hydrogen, and if that hydrogen was then channeled into the resonant King's Chamber, where it could be ignited or otherwise react with the vibrating quartz-laden granite, you would have a system capable of generating substantial power. For what purpose? Dunn suggests wireless energy transmission, similar to the theories Nikola Tesla explored in the early 20th century. Tesla believed you could transmit electrical energy through the atmosphere without wires, using the Earth itself as a conductor. He built experimental towers attempting to prove it. The technology worked on a small scale but was never successfully implemented globally, largely because there was no economic incentive. You cannot monetize energy that anyone can access freely from the air, but an ancient civilization facing a global catastrophe might have different priorities. If they knew the world was ending, if they understood that preserving knowledge and providing tools for rebuilding were more important than profit, they might encode a power generation system into a structure designed to outlast the collapse. The problem with Dunn's theory is that it requires accepting the pyramid as something far more sophisticated than mainstream archaeology allows. It requires admitting that Bronze Age humans, or whoever actually built the structure, understood chemistry, acoustics, and piezoelectricity at a level we associate with modern science. And yet, the evidence is there. The resonance is measurable. The chemical residues are real. The precision of the granite beams, the geometry of the chambers, the alignment of the shafts, all of it functions in ways that support Dunn's hypothesis, whether or not that was the original intent. In 2018, researchers at ITMO University in Russia used electromagnetic simulation software to model how the Great Pyramid would interact with radio waves. They were not looking for evidence of ancient technology. They were conducting a theoretical exercise, testing how electromagnetic energy would behave when encountering a structure with the pyramid's dimensions and material composition. The results were unexpected. The pyramid focuses electromagnetic energy into its internal chambers and beneath its base. At certain wavelengths, particularly in the radio frequency range, the structure acts as a resonator, concentrating energy in the king's chamber and the subterranean chamber below the pyramid. This is not speculation. This is physics. The shape and materials create this effect whether anyone intended it or not. But the question remains, did someone intend it? The sarcophagus in the king's chamber has never made sense as a burial container. It is unfinished. The exterior is rough, showing tool marks and unpolished surfaces. There is no lid. No body was ever found inside. No inscriptions dedicate it to Khufu or any other pharaoh. It sits in a room with no decorations, no hieroglyphs, no paintings, none of the elaborate funerary art that fills every other royal tomb in Egypt. When you strike the sarcophagus, it rings. The granite resonates at 400 to 38 Hz, the same frequency as the chamber itself. The sarcophagus is not a coffin. It is a component in a larger acoustic system, designed to vibrate at a specific frequency when activated by sound. Dunn measured the sarcophagus precisely. Its internal volume, when calculated, matches specific harmonic ratios. The thickness of the walls, the dimensions of the interior, the shape of the box, all correlate with acoustic principles used in designing resonance chambers. Modern sound engineers recognize the design. It is a tuning fork scaled up to human size, carved from stone, and placed at the focal point of an acoustic amplifier. There is a reason Egyptian authorities banned independent acoustic testing inside the pyramid in 2012, after Reed's experiments. After other researchers began asking to conduct similar studies, access was shut down. No official explanation was given. Requests for permits are denied. The few researchers who have managed limited access report that their findings are subject to review and approval before publication, a process that effectively censors any results contradicting the official narrative. What did they find that required shutting down all future research? The pyramid hums. Visitors have reported it for decades. A low-frequency vibration, barely perceptible, that some people feel more than hear. It is most noticeable in the King's Chamber and the Grand Gallery, the two spaces with the most pronounced acoustic properties. The hum does not come from machinery or ventilation systems. The pyramid has no power source, no mechanical components that would generate vibration, yet the structure resonates, as if it is still active, still responding to some input we cannot detect or have forgotten how to provide. Ancient Egyptian texts mention the power of sound. The priests spoke of words of power, specific utterances that could affect physical reality. Modern readers dismiss this as mysticism, the primitive belief that magic words could manipulate the world. But what if the words of power were specific frequencies, acoustic formulas that activated technologies we no longer understand? What if the pyramid was not a tomb, not a temple, not a monument to ego, but a device waiting to be properly activated by someone who knows the right frequency, the right sequence, the right combination of sound and intent? And what if shutting down acoustic research is not about protecting the structure, but about ensuring that no one accidentally discovers how to turn it back on? The cover-up is not ancient history. It is happening right now, in real time, with institutional precision and coordinated silence. In 2017, a team of international scientists published findings from the Scan Pyramids project, a multi-year effort using muon radiography to peer inside the Great Pyramid without drilling or damaging the structure. Muons are subatomic particles created when cosmic rays hit Earth's atmosphere. They penetrate solid matter but are absorbed at different rates depending on density. By placing detectors inside and around the pyramid, researchers could map internal voids the way doctors use X-rays to see inside the human body. The team discovered a massive hidden chamber above the Grand Gallery. The void is at least 100 feet long with a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery itself. This is not a small cavity or construction gap. This is a space large enough to hold significant architectural features, possibly artifacts, potentially answers to questions that have persisted for millennia. The discovery was published in Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. The findings were peer-reviewed, verified by multiple detection methods, and confirmed by independent analysis. This was not fringe research. This was mainstream science revealing something that should not exist according to the established understanding of the pyramid's internal structure. Zahi Hawass, who, despite no longer holding an official government position, still wields enormous influence over Egyptian archaeology, immediately dismissed the findings. He claimed the void was a known construction feature, a gap left intentionally for structural reasons. When pressed to explain why this gap did not appear in any previous surveys or architectural studies, his response was that the researchers did not understand pyramid construction. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities refused to authorize any exploration of the void. No cameras, no robots, no investigation of any kind. The chamber remained sealed, its contents unknown, its existence officially acknowledged but practically ignored. Why discover a massive hidden space inside the most studied structure in human history and then refuse to look inside? The pattern is consistent across decades. Discovery leads to denial. Evidence leads to dismissal. Attempts at investigation lead to institutional obstruction. Robert Schoch, the geologist who identified water erosion on the Sphinx, did not lose his tenure at Boston University, but he was effectively exiled from mainstream Egyptology. His papers are not accepted at major conferences. His findings are not taught in university courses. He is not invited to participate in official excavations. The academic establishment did not refute his geological analysis because they could not. Instead, they excluded him from the conversation entirely. Graham Hancock, whose books on lost civilizations have sold millions of copies and introduced alternative historical theories to a global audience, was banned from giving a TEDx talk after initially being invited. The talk was removed from the official TEDx channel. The stated reason was that his ideas were pseudoscience, that he promoted unfounded speculation. Yet Hancock does not claim certainty. He presents evidence, asks questions, and suggests possibilities. That is supposed to be what science does. The message is clear. Question the narrative, and you will be removed from the platforms where serious discussion happens. This is not accidental. This is how institutional gatekeeping functions. You do not need a grand conspiracy with secret meetings and shadowy figures coordinating suppression. You just need a system where careers depend on conformity, where funding flows to research that supports established conclusions, where challenging the orthodoxy means professional suicide. Egyptology as a field was built on a specific timeline and set of assumptions. The pyramids were built during the 4th dynasty by pharaohs using bronze tools and manual labor. The Sphinx was carved by Khafre around 2500 BC. Egyptian civilization developed in isolation, without influence from earlier advanced cultures. This narrative is foundational. Textbooks are written based on it. University courses are structured around it. Museum exhibits present it as fact. If that narrative is wrong, if the pyramids are older, if the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt, if there was an advanced precursor civilization, then every textbook needs revision. Every career built on the orthodox timeline is undermined. Every expert who defended the conventional story looks foolish or complicit. The incentive is to protect the narrative at all costs. Egypt has economic reasons to maintain the story. Tourism generates over $12 billion annually. The pyramids are the centerpiece of that industry, marketed as the crowning achievement of ancient Egyptian engineering and culture. National identity is tied to the monuments. School children are taught that their ancestors built wonders that amazed the world through ingenuity and determination. Admitting the Egyptians inherited these structures, that they were caretakers rather than creators, would be a psychological and economic blow. The monuments would still attract visitors, but the story would change. Instead of celebrating Egyptian achievement, tourism would focus on a mystery Egypt cannot solve. That shift threatens both revenue and national pride. So the Ministry of Antiquities controls access with absolute authority. Independent researchers need permits that are routinely denied. Excavation proposals disappear into bureaucratic limbo. Studies that might challenge the timeline are blocked before they begin. And when discoveries do occur, they are managed, filtered, and spun to fit the acceptable narrative. Hawass was the public face of this control for decades. His aggressive defense of orthodox Egyptology, his dismissal of alternative theories, his tendency to shut down projects that uncovered inconvenient evidence, all served to protect a story that benefits multiple stakeholders: the Egyptian government, the academic establishment, the tourism industry, and anyone whose career depends on the conventional timeline remaining unchallenged. But the suppression extends beyond Egypt. When evidence of advanced ancient technology or pre-Ice Age civilizations surfaces anywhere in the world, the response is remarkably similar. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was excavated slowly, with findings released carefully and mainstream interpretation insisted it was a hunter-gatherer ritual site, despite the engineering sophistication required to move and carve 20-ton pillars. Gunung Padang in Indonesia faced immediate pushback when researchers suggested the site might be 20,000 years old, with Indonesian authorities halting excavation and distancing themselves from the implications. Yonaguni's underwater structures off Japan are still officially classified as natural formations, despite obvious right angles, terraces, and carved features. The pattern repeats because the stakes are the same everywhere. Admitting advanced pre-Ice Age civilization means admitting human progress is not linear. It means we rose before and fell. It means technological advancement is fragile, that knowledge can be lost, that we are not the first to reach our current level of sophistication, and might not be the last. That realization threatens more than academic careers. It threatens the entire modern worldview built on the assumption of continuous progress, the belief that we are the pinnacle of human achievement, the most advanced civilization that has ever existed. If we are not, if Atlantis, or something like it, really existed and was destroyed, then our own civilization is not special. We are not immune to collapse. The technologies we depend on, the knowledge we have accumulated, could vanish in a generation if the right catastrophe strikes. That is a psychologically uncomfortable truth. It is easier to dismiss the evidence, exclude the dissidents, and maintain the comforting lie that history is a steady climb from primitive to advanced, from ignorance to enlightenment, with us at the summit looking down at everyone who came before. In 2015, a fire destroyed a Coptic Christian monastery near Giza. The monastery was old, largely forgotten, except by local communities. Official reports attributed the fire to electrical failure. The structure was too damaged to rebuild and was demolished. Rumors circulated among researchers who had visited the monastery years earlier. They claimed the library contained pre-Islamic texts, some possibly predating Christianity in Egypt, preserved by monks who understood their historical value. Among these texts were supposed to be references to the monuments of Giza, descriptions that called them beacons of stone, built before the language of men. No copies of these texts have surfaced. The few scholars who mentioned them in passing stopped discussing the topic after the fire. Whether the texts existed, whether they were destroyed, whether the fire was truly accidental, none of it can be verified now. But the pattern is familiar. Throughout history, libraries burn. The Library of Alexandria, which held the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, was destroyed across multiple incidents, its contents lost forever. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, burned by Mongol invaders, its books thrown into the Tigris until the river ran black with ink. Mayan codices, burned by Spanish conquistadors determined to erase indigenous knowledge. Nalanda University in India, burned and its monks slaughtered. Centuries of Buddhist scholarship turned to ash. Knowledge is controlled by destroying the sources that contradict approved narratives. And when the sources are gone, the official story becomes the only story, repeated until it is accepted as truth. The pyramid cannot be burned. The Sphinx cannot be erased. But their secrets can be sealed behind locked doors and denied permits. Their measurements can be dismissed as coincidence. Their impossible precision can be attributed to unlimited labor and determination. And anyone who asks too many questions can be labeled a conspiracy theorist, excluded from serious discourse, and ignored until they give up or die, leaving the establishment to continue telling the same story to the next generation. The cover-up does not require evil intent. It only requires institutional inertia, economic incentives, and the universal human tendency to protect what benefits us, even when the cost is truth. When the official story collapses under the weight of its own contradictions, you are left with questions that demand answers, even uncomfortable ones. The evidence is clear. The precision is impossible with Bronze Age tools. The mathematics encode knowledge that should not exist. The geological weathering points to dates that predate known civilization. The institutional response is suppression rather than investigation. Something does not fit, and pretending otherwise is no longer intellectually honest. So, if the Egyptians did not build the pyramids, or at least did not build them when and how we have been told, then who did? There are three primary theories, each with different implications, each requiring you to accept something that challenges your understanding of history, technology, or reality itself. The first theory is the most rational, the most grounded in evidence we can touch and measure. It suggests that an advanced human civilization existed before the rise of Egypt, Sumer, and the other cultures we consider the cradle of civilization. This society mastered engineering, astronomy, and mathematics during the Ice Age, when sea levels were lower and vast stretches of now submerged continental shelves were dry land, suitable for settlement. Graham Hancock has built his life's work around this hypothesis. He calls them the magicians of the gods, survivor teachers from a cataclysmic event who spread across the post-flood world carrying fragments of lost knowledge. The Younger Dryas impact around 10,800 BC would have devastated any coastal civilization. The survivors, reduced in number and resources, would have sought refuge in regions where other humans lived, bringing with them advanced understanding of astronomy, architecture, agriculture, and mathematics. This explains the sudden appearance of monumental architecture at sites like Göbekli Tepe, built just as the Younger Dryas ended. It explains why multiple cultures around the world began farming wheat, barley, and rice within centuries of each other, despite being geographically isolated. It explains the flood myths preserved in over 200 cultures, the stories of wise teachers arriving after catastrophe, the legends of a golden age that ended in destruction. The pyramids and Sphinx, in this framework, were either built by this pre-flood civilization or constructed shortly after the catastrophe by survivors who still possessed the knowledge required for such engineering feats. The Egyptian dynasties came later, inherited these structures, and claimed them as their own, perhaps not even understanding their true age or purpose. This theory fits the geological evidence. It fits the astronomical alignments. It fits the mathematical encoding. It requires accepting that human civilization is older and more cyclical than we have been taught, but it does not require abandoning physics or biology. It simply asks us to admit we might not be the first advanced society, that progress is not guaranteed, and that knowledge can be lost. The second theory is more controversial but cannot be dismissed without addressing the evidence that supports it. In 1968, Erich von Däniken published Chariots of the Gods, arguing that ancient monuments around the world showed evidence of extraterrestrial contact. His thesis was straightforward. Humans in the ancient past encountered beings from other worlds who possessed advanced technology. These beings were interpreted as gods by primitive humans who had no framework for understanding spacecraft, energy weapons, or genetic engineering. The monuments, the precision, the knowledge encoded in their design came not from human ingenuity, but from alien instruction or direct construction. Mainstream science rejected this immediately. Von Däniken was labeled a charlatan. His ideas were ridiculed as science fiction masquerading as archaeology. And much of the criticism was justified. Von Däniken made claims without sufficient evidence, misinterpreted ancient texts, and sometimes fabricated details to support his narrative. But dismissing the entire premise because of flawed execution is intellectually lazy. The precision of the Great Pyramid exceeds anything we can achieve with hand tools today. The coordinates encoding the speed of light in the pyramid's location seems impossible for a culture that did not know light had a measurable speed. The Nazca lines in Peru, massive geoglyphs visible only from the air, were created by a people who had no aircraft. Puma Punku in Bolivia features andesite blocks with drill holes and cuts that suggest machinery, not chisels and hammers. If you take seriously the idea that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe, and if you accept that any civilization capable of interstellar travel would be thousands or millions of years more advanced than us, then the possibility that they visited Earth in the distant past is not absurd. It is statistically plausible. Ancient texts describe gods descending from the sky in flying machines, the Vimanas of Hindu epics, Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel, the fiery chariots in the Book of Kings. Modern readers call these mythological, but what if they were eyewitness accounts described in the only vocabulary available to people who had never seen technology? The extraterrestrial hypothesis does not require that aliens built everything. It only requires that at some point, contact occurred, knowledge was transferred, and certain achievements we attribute to ancient humans might have had outside assistance. The pyramid could be a human structure built using techniques taught by non-human intelligences. The precision, the mathematics, the encoded knowledge of planetary dimensions and light speed all become more explicable if the source was not Bronze Age workers but a civilization that had already mastered interstellar travel. This theory is uncomfortable because it diminishes human achievement. We want to believe our ancestors built wonders through their own brilliance. Attributing it to aliens feels like admitting inadequacy. But intellectual honesty requires examining evidence without emotional bias. If the precision cannot be explained by known tools and techniques, if the knowledge encoded exceeds what the culture should have possessed, then external influence must be considered as one possible explanation, even if we would prefer it not to be true. The third theory is the most rational synthesis of the others, and it may be the closest to what the pyramid actually represents. The pyramid is a message, not a tomb, not a temple, not a power plant, though it may have functioned as one. It is a time capsule, an archive of knowledge encoded in the most permanent form imaginable: stone, mathematics, and astronomical alignments that will remain accurate for tens of thousands of years. Whoever built it knew something we are only beginning to remember. Civilizations are fragile. Knowledge can be lost. Catastrophes reset progress. If you want to preserve crucial information across an event that might destroy everything, you do not write it in books that can burn or digital storage that requires electricity. You encode it in relationships that any sufficiently advanced culture will rediscover. Pi, phi, the dimensions of the Earth, the speed of light, the precession of the equinoxes. These are universal constants. Any civilization that develops mathematics and astronomy will eventually learn them. The pyramid encodes these constants not to show off, but to bootstrap future civilizations back to knowledge after collapse. It is a reset point, a beacon saying we were here, we knew these things, and if you are reading this, you are on the right path to rediscovering what was lost. This theory does not require aliens, though it does not exclude them. It does not require rejecting human ingenuity, though it does require accepting that we were once more advanced and somehow fell. It simply recognizes that the pyramid's design is too deliberate, too precise, too information-dense to be anything other than intentional communication across time. The question is not whether the message exists. The question is whether we are ready to understand what it says and act on the warning it contains. Because if the pyramid is a message about cyclical collapse, we might be living in the final years before history repeats. We began with a number hidden in the desert, a coordinate that matches the speed of light, a precision that should not exist. And over the last hour, we have followed that thread through layers of evidence that all point to the same impossible conclusion. The Great Pyramid is not what we have been told. It is not a tomb. Khufu's body was never found inside. No pharaoh's mummy has ever been discovered in any of the Giza pyramids, despite the elaborate burial chambers and sarcophagi that supposedly held them. The king's chamber contains no hieroglyphs, no paintings, none of the funerary texts that cover every other royal tomb in Egypt. The structure was not built for death. It was built for something else entirely. It is not a monument to ego. Pharaohs carved their names everywhere. Temples, obelisks, statues. Every surface was an opportunity to declare divine authority and ensure immortal remembrance. Yet the pyramid's interior is blank, silent. No boasting, no declarations, no royal cartouches proclaiming ownership. If Khufu built the greatest structure in human history, why did he not sign his work? It is not even Egyptian in the way we understand Egyptian architecture. Every temple, every tomb, every monument in Egypt follows a pattern: decoration, inscription, symbolism connecting the structure to specific gods and pharaohs. The pyramid breaks that pattern completely. It stands apart, not just in scale but in purpose and design philosophy. What it is, what it has always been, is an archive, a library carved in stone, a repository of mathematical and astronomical knowledge encoded in dimensions, ratios, and alignments that transcend language and culture. Whoever built it understood that civilizations collapse. They knew that writing systems become obsolete, that languages evolve into mutual incomprehensibility, that even the most sophisticated technologies can be forgotten within a few generations, if the knowledge required to maintain them is not preserved. So they built something that could not be forgotten, something so massive, so precisely constructed, so deliberately positioned that it would force future generations to measure it, to study it, to eventually recognize that its proportions encode universal constants. Pi, phi, Earth's dimensions, the speed of light, the precession of the equinoxes. These are not cultural artifacts. These are cosmic truths that any advanced civilization must rediscover if they want to understand the universe. The pyramid teaches without words. It waits with the patience of stone for students who might not arrive for thousands of years. And when those students finally develop the tools to measure accurately, when they achieve the mathematical sophistication to recognize what the ratios mean, the knowledge is there, preserved, waiting to be reclaimed. We are those students. Right now, in this moment, We have the technology to see what previous generations could not. Laser surveying equipment that reveals precision down to fractions of millimeters. Muon radiography that shows hidden chambers without drilling. Computer simulations that reconstruct ancient skies and confirm astronomical alignments. We can finally read what the pyramid has been saying for millennia. And what it says is this: you are not the first. Others came before you. They knew what you know. They achieved what you have achieved. And they built this to ensure that when catastrophe comes, as it always does, the knowledge necessary to rebuild will not be permanently lost. That is the warning embedded in the silence. That is the message written in mathematics. Progress is not linear. Civilization is not guaranteed. The comfortable assumption that we are the pinnacle of human development, that our technologies and knowledge are secure, that collapse only happens to primitive societies, is a dangerous illusion. The Younger Dryas impact proves it. An advanced Ice Age civilization, if it existed, was erased so thoroughly that we debate whether it was real. Their cities are underwater. Their records are gone. Only the monuments remain, and even those are dismissed as impossible or attributed to later cultures who had nothing to do with their construction. We face similar threats: climate change accelerating beyond control, nuclear arsenals capable of rendering the planet uninhabitable, artificial intelligence developing faster than our ability to regulate it, resource depletion pushing societies toward conflict, pandemics revealing how fragile global supply chains are. Any one of these could trigger a cascade that unravels our technological civilization within decades. And if that happens, what will survive? Digital archives require electricity and functioning computers. Books can burn. Oral traditions fade. Within a few generations, nearly everything we know could be lost, leaving whoever comes after to start over from scratch, reinventing the wheel, rediscovering fire, slowly climbing back toward the knowledge we once had. Unless we do what the pyramid builders did, unless we preserve crucial knowledge in forms that can outlast collapse. Stone, mathematics, astronomical alignments, information encoded in structures too massive to be ignored, too precisely constructed to be accidental, positioned where they cannot be missed. The pyramid is both a time capsule and a warning. It says, this has happened before, prepare for it to happen again, and when it does, here is the knowledge you will need to rebuild. The question is whether we will listen. Egyptian authorities seal chambers because they know what the full truth implies. Academic institutions suppress alternative theories because careers depend on the conventional narrative. Governments protect the orthodox timeline because tourism and national pride are more valuable than historical accuracy. This is not a conspiracy of shadowy figures meeting in secret. This is systemic incentive to avoid uncomfortable truths. But the truth does not need permission to exist. The coordinates encoding light speed are there whether anyone acknowledges them. The impossible precision is measurable. The geological evidence is undeniable. The astronomical alignments are verifiable. The mathematical constants are encoded regardless of what textbooks say. You have spent the last hour following evidence that leads to one conclusion. Human history is not what we have been taught. We are not the first advanced civilization. The pyramid was not built by Bronze Age workers dragging blocks up ramps, and the institutions controlling access to these sites know it. So what do you do with that knowledge? You share it. You ask questions. You refuse to accept dismissive answers that protect comfortable lies. You support researchers who risk their careers to pursue truth over conformity. You recognize that the shape standing in the desert is not just an ancient monument, but a message written for you. Right now, in this moment, when we still have time to learn from it. Subscribe if you have not already. You are part of a small community willing to hold uncomfortable truths, and that community needs to grow. Turn on notifications, because this is not the end, this is the beginning. In the next video, we are going deeper. The Mars-Egypt connection, the face on Cydonia, the mathematical relationships between monuments on two different planets. If you thought this was strange, you have no idea what comes next. Comment your biggest revelation from this video. What piece of evidence convinced you? What question are you left with? I read every comment, and your insights shape where we go from here. And share this. Send it to someone you think can handle it. Not everyone is ready for this conversation, but the ones who are need to find each other. The pyramid has been standing for thousands of years, encoding knowledge, waiting for someone to understand. We are that someone. The message is clear. The warning is urgent. And the only question left is whether we will act on it before the cycle repeats, and everything we know is buried beneath sand and silence. waiting for the next civilization to dig it up and wonder what we were trying to say. Until next time, this is Mr. H, reminding you, some questions are too important to stop asking, and some truths are too valuable to let die. The shape that memory forgot is still standing, and now you will never forget it.